Okay, number 1. Which of the following best describes all of the organisms in the kingdoms Protista, Plantae, Fungi, and Animalia? I'm going to box my question. Underline my keywords. So we're talking about organisms, which I know are living things. We're talking about kingdoms, which I know is a level of classification, specifically the kingdoms Protista, Plantae, Fungi, Animalia. So if I were to list out all of my kingdoms, we have these guys: Protista, Plantae, Fungi, Animalia. They all live inside of the same domain. Kind of like they're all different rooms inside of the same house, which is eukarya. So whatever they all have in common is part of the domain eukarya. Okay, so what do all organisms inside eukarya have? We need to know that all organisms inside of eukarya have eukaryotic cells, which are our organized cells organized into organelles. All of my DNA is inside of my nucleus. All of my energy is inside of my mitochondria, versus my other domains, which would be bacteria and archaea. They have prokaryotic cells. They are pros at making a mess. It's a hot mess express in there, okay? So when I look over here, let's start with D, prokaryotes. Well, no, eukarya cannot be prokaryotes. Those are totally different things. C is correct, this eukaryotic cell. But let's keep going. So photosynthetic organisms. This means you can make your own food out of sunlight. I know Plantae can make its own food out of sunlight, but none of the organisms inside of fungi or Animalia can do that, okay? So if the question asks which of the following best describes all of them, they are not all photosynthetic. And then which of the following best describes all of them? Multicellular organisms. Let me erase these. I know that Animalia and Plantae are all multicellular organisms, but fungi and Protista are not, okay? Most Protista are actually unicellular. So number 1 is C. Number 2, in Linnaeus' time, all living things were grouped into 2 kingdoms, okay? So all living things that we were discovering could go in 1 or 2 groups. Later, there were 5 kingdoms. So over time, we get more evidence. Now we're splitting them up into 5 kingdoms. And now we have 6 kingdoms. What is the main reason for this increase in the number of kingdoms? A, scientists have discovered organisms that were previously unknown, so new kingdoms had to be created for them. Let's see, does this answer our question? I'm going to put it in a box. Reason for the increase in the number of kingdoms. Okay. If we discovered new organisms, would that mean that we have to add new kingdoms? No. For example, if I had 2 groups, eukaryote, prokaryote, and I discover a new organism, I don't need to make a new kingdom. I know that they will either go into one or the other. So A is not the correct choice. B, kingdom Plantae had to be split up into several kingdoms when scientists found out that not all plants can photosynthesize. 2 things wrong with B. 1, all plants can photosynthesize, so that is not true. And 2, kingdom Plantae still exists, so did it have to be split up into several kingdoms? No. C, as scientists learned more about genetics and biochemistry, some organisms were moved out of existing kingdoms and into new ones. Now this one sounds good because now they're really talking about some new evidence. Remember, durability of science means we're open to changes, new evidence. And they're talking about existing kingdoms splitting up into new ones, which is some better information. Instead of making a brand new kingdom, splitting up ones we already had as we get more evidence. So we like this answer C. D says since the time of Linnaeus, which remember was the 1600s, Many new organisms have evolved, and most of them don't fit into the original kingdoms. That is not true, because evolution takes millions of years, not since the 1600s have many new organisms evolved. So that means that D is incorrect and C is your answer. Number 3, which of the 2 domains are only composed of unicellular organisms? Box my question. I know I'm talking about domains, which you need to be able to brain dump are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Only unicellular organisms. Well, let me think about what I know about these 3, okay? I know that bacteria are prokaryotic, pros at making a mess. Archaea, prokaryotic, pros at making a mess. Eukarya is kind of the black sheep of the family because they are organized into organelles. Remember, we want our backpacks to be eukaryotic, organized. So this tells us about whether organisms can be uni or multicellular. If you are a pro at making a mess, that disorganized cell is always going to be by itself. You can never take a prokaryotic cell and build it into a tissue, okay? Same thing with archaea. It is always going to be unicellular. The reason that eukarya can be uni or multicellular is because it's organized. And so that organization lets us build up into multicellular organisms. Okay, so my answer is bacteria and archaea. B and D are wrong because they say eukarya is only unicellular. That's not true. And A is wrong because A says eubacteria, which, if you remember, is the kingdom inside of the domain bacteria, okay? And they're asking for the name of 2 domains, so that's what makes A wrong and C the correct answer. Number 4, Charles studies 4 organisms in Kingdom Animalia. He makes a table similar to the one below to summarize his findings about the classification of the organisms. So we've got 4 different living things. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we've got some of their classification levels. So for this, we need to know that classification levels, as we move down, okay, think about at the top is a domain. And then we have kingdom, dear King Philip came over for good soup. Okay, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. As we move down from domain to species, organisms at each level will have more in common as we go down. Okay, so when I look at the phylum, they are all a part of chordate. That means they all have something in common. When I go down to class, that means they have even more in common if they are a part of the same class. They have even more in common than they do if they're a part of the same phylum. Because to be a chordate means that you have a backbone. To be in class Mammalia means you have a backbone and you're a mammal. So because these are all part of the same class, they're even more related than 2 organisms in the same phylum. Okay? Same thing with order. They are even more related now because they all have a backbone, they're all a mammal, and they're all carnivores. When I go down to my next level, family, Felidae, 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 Vivaridae, this tells me that organism number 4 is not as related to these 3 organisms because these 3 organisms all have their family level in common. So organisms 1, 2, and 3 all have more in common with each other than 4, okay? Let's keep moving down. In genus, we have Panthera. I'm not going to try to pronounce that second one, Panthera, and we already know 4 was on its own already. So number 1 and number 3 have the most in common because they have the most levels in common. They have 5 levels in common: phylum, class, order, family, genus, that we can see on this chart, versus organism 2 only shares 4 with them. So based on the table, which of the organisms likely have the most characteristics in common? Remember, they have the most in common if they have the most groups in common. So that is organisms 1 and 3. And then our final question, the 3-domain system is a biological classification introduced in 1990 that divides cellular life into bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Which of the following best describes the eukarya classification? So let's brain dump our domains again. We got bacteria, archaea, eukarya. What should we know about these guys? Bacteria are those pros that make it a mess, prokaryote. Archaea, prokaryote. Eukarya, organized into organelles. Okay? The only other things you may need to pull out of your brain for your test is that bacteria can be found anywhere. Archaea are found in extreme environments. And even though bacteria and archaea are always unicellular, eukarya can be uni or multicellular, meaning it can be a cell by itself, or it can build into tissues and organs and organ systems and make organisms. Okay, so let's look at our answer choices. Which of the following best describes the eukarya classification? So I'm looking just at this guy. A, has a membrane enclosed nucleus. Well, that is true, and that's a part of being eukarya, is that you have these organized organelles. Okay, so A is good. B, does not have complex internal organelles. This is not true. It does have complex internal organelles. C, they are unicellular organisms. We reviewed that they can be uni or multicellular organisms. So that is not a good description of the whole domain. And D, are prokaryotic cells. That is the opposite of eukaryotic. So I know that D is wrong and A is correct. Please make sure that your questions are marked up in a similar fashion, that we're brain dumping for each question so we can be prepared with